Hi. Yeah, basically, we also did it a bit for ourselves, right? Not only for you guys, but obviously we're very much our own customers with these APIs. But I'll tell you why it's specifically important for you. We ourselves we could do with, let's say, much simpler APIs that would require less work to build. Yeah, but I'm going to tell you why we did the extra effort of building these more sophisticated APIs. So when we say Checkmk needs to be extensible, we want extensible interfaces, then obviously the question is, if you're extending something you want to integrate into it, you need to talk to it. Basically, that's the job of APIs, to define actually the code you write. How is it supposed to be interacting with Checkmk? And that's why these APIs are the most important part for this extensibility bit. So we currently have about 2,000 plugins that can monitor virtually anything. I mean, you've heard a lot already today what we can do and what we are doing, from applications over networking, virtualization, operating systems, hardware, sensors, and the whole cloud world as well, of course. Unfortunately, anything does not mean everything. That's quite an important difference, because there will always be things that are just so niche that we can't offer them as part of the product. And given the versatility of IT infrastructure, I don't think we can expect this to ever change, no matter how big we become. So the obvious solution to this is users must be able to extend the monitoring capabilities for themselves. And what is important to us is here the second point, that we really want these third-party plugins to be undistinguishable from the ones we ship. Of course, we can't guarantee that. So if you have different styles of how the a summary is provided, for instance. Obviously, we can't force a third-party plugin library to be in line with what we ship. But the point here is that third-party libraries or plugins can be created in a way that they integrate seamlessly. They can be just as fancy. They can be just as easily configured. And what we don't want to have is services or any other plugins that are somewhat second-class citizens to the ones we ship. And I think overall, this is the case. So, I mean, in the end, it's open source, so you can always do anything if you are prepared to spend enough time trying to do it. We want to make it easy, of course. There's one important point, I think, where it becomes obvious that we are not there yet, which is during upgrades. So if you encounter problems with your custom plugins, chances are quite high, I think, that these problems will be seen during the update. So I think Martin already showed something similar. So you certainly have seen something like this. And there is a solution to that. What's the root cause? Basically, the root cause is that still for many plugins, we only have internal APIs, and these change. Because we keep developing, we try to improve the code base. Obviously, improvement implies change. And this is not a problem for the plugins we provide you with, because of course we can just always keep everything in sync, and then we don't have any problems, we don't have any surprises during update, because we know what we are doing, ideally. However, if external extensions and these internal APIs now meet during an update, then you can run into problems, as you all probably know. And we keep promising that we will improve that, and we still are doing that. In this case, In this case, the solution is to have well-documented and versioned stable APIs for external use. And the solution is simple in the sense that well, it's a well-established idea. It's not our invention, and you just have to do it. Yeah, unfortunately, quite a lot of work and requires a good design effort. And since the point of these API is that they should be stable, it means that we need to think very carefully about how they look like, because the one thing we don't want to do is change them all of the time. The first proper API in that sense we introduced in 2020 with Checkmk 2.0, which was the new Check API, also known as agent-based API version 1. And so I think we can say it's a success in the sense that we had a high stability of this API. So every extension using this API has been working since then because we haven't changed the API at all. The focus with this API was the development of check plugins and of hardware software inventory plugins, which is the most important part of plugin development, and that's why we started with that, obviously. Now there's a lot more that you can build plugins for and that you might want to integrate into Checkmk. So for the typical scenario where you want to extend the monitoring capabilities, so I'm not talking about dashlets, for instance, but really, let's say for the sake of this example, you want to integrate some Kubernetes monitoring. Now, what do you have to do? So from a user perspective, you start usually with configuring some sort of data source, a special agent. There you need a setup rule. So this setup rule is also created using one API, the rule set API. After that, so this rule is what the user uses to create the configuration. So they enter the data, they describe how they want to run their monitoring, and then from that configuration, you really need to create the actual program call that is executed by the backend. That's yet another type of plugin that you need that turns this configuration into the actual program call. When you run this program, it creates data. From that data, we create services that you are most likely familiar with, and parameters, for instance, and graphs. And that what you also want to be able to do is you want to configure these services in some meaningful way. The most common example, of course, is to configure some levels where you again need some rule set that users need to be able to create. So in this bit is covered by the API that we introduced in 2020. And I'm very happy to say that now we have covered all of the other cases as well. So this gives you now these 4 APIs. The server-side calls API, that is the API that creates the program calls from the user configuration. So this includes special agents and active checks, but they work very much in the same way, and it's the same task, creating a program call from a user's configuration. So that's why that's one API. And then we have the rule sets API that is used to create these nice setup rules that the users can then configure in the graphical user interface. And we have the graphing API that you use to create your custom graphs, metrics, or performators. And for consistency and reasons that are, well, if I would explain them now, it would probably be boring to all of you who don't really know it already anyway. So we introduced a new version of the agent-based API, a version 2, that has very little changes compared to the version 1, but it just it serves the purpose of making the whole plugin business, I'll tell you later, more consistent, and it really plays together very nicely now. And so we decided that is reason enough to create a new version of this API. So hopefully this will mean you have, well, say less hassle during upgrades. As we can see from the agent-based API version 1, it really does help. It's still supported now, so you wouldn't have had any issues that are caused by the update for these plugins. And maybe at least as important is the point that, of course, you will have to adjust your plugins every once in a while, because software development is development, so things change. However, if we have a well-defined, documented, versioned API, those are no unforeseen update incompatibilities, but they are very much foreseen. And we can tell you in advance, we can have an overlap, we can support the old version for a while, and then you get your time to migrate. And then we can be very specific in what changes and how you need to address that. And we can give you an appropriate time frame for the migration. And also, hopefully, it's less effort to begin with to develop the plugins if you just have resources where it's properly documented how you implement those plugins. And we can now also start to see that we should also have a documentation on how to write these plugins that can be consumed by an AI, because I think it's kind of obvious that some of you won't be doing their programming themselves anymore soon, I think. So that's also something that hopefully is a nice side effect of a good documentation. So the technical benefits of these development APIs, the first ones I think you already know from the agent-based API if you were using them. So we are now more dependent of Checkmk itself, so that means you can actually develop and test your plugins without having to deploy them into a running site all of the time. We have no side effects anymore, so that's something that also for the agent-based API now changes. We no longer have a global state that is manipulated if you import the plugins, but rather a discovery-based approach, which means that also you have, again, easier testing, better linter support, and you can, in general, leverage your IDEs much easier. Yeah, the extension imports a well-defined version API. I think that's said now. And the principles that we try to follow are, we didn't make those up, but I'm going to tell you anyway. We try to establish conventions and consistency, meaning things that do the same thing should look the same. And I'm not talking about the user interface now, I'm talking about the developer interface, so to speak, meaning that if you're comfortable with some feature, you've learned how to develop it, it should be very easy for you to extend your knowledge to other concepts of the API, because ideally all of them work in a similar fashion. So once you're used to it, you'll have a very steep learning curve. Yeah, also make the implicit explicit. I think I'll come back to that in 2 slides maybe, tell you what that means. And reduce unnecessary options, because that's just a source of inconsistency. And also, over the years, we have accumulated various ways of doing things where you really actually only need one. And we've tried to consolidate those and get rid of the ones that you don't need. And then we try to ensure this fail early principle, meaning that whenever reasonable, we do some validations beforehand, but also I think the linter support is a very strong aspect of this fail early principle, in the sense that you really are told that you're doing something wrong way before you even execute the code. And that's obviously a nice feature. The sooner you learn about your mistakes, you can correct them. And in the end, the last moment where a mistake can be noticed is the actual user of the plugin, and that's what we want to avoid, right? So what happens if you don't have standardization? You've probably seen some of these. So these are ways to configure levels. So levels are the most common configuration option, where you just have a warning level and a critical level. There's 2 numbers, and we see here 6 different ways of configuring them. And that's just because, well, the 6 matched on the slide, and then we stopped looking for it, but there are even more. Now, it will always look like this, and I think we've already seen this a couple of times today. So levels will look like this. And it's very hard now with the new API to make them look different. You can, but you really have to go out of your way, so you can expect to see them like this. And also a nice side effect is that this choice of no levels, don't impose levels, always be okay. In the past, you can find this in many rules. You can not find it in all of the rules, because depending on whether the developer remembered to implement this or not, you can choose it or not. Now it's just always there. There's nothing for the developer to decide or to implement. You just get those always. And then the last bullet here, the option for predictive levels. That's what I meant by making implicit explicit, for instance. So in the past, these predictive levels were optional, and I think many plugin developers just didn't consider them or didn't think about them because it's an optional thing, right? And in the start, you just do only what's necessary to get your plugin up and running, and then maybe you forget to revisit it. With the new API, you just have to decide, do I want those levels with predictive levels or without predictive levels? And both is fine. Obviously, you just have to make the decision. There is no implicit fallback, but the developer has to decide what they want. Another thing that's, well, it's a side effect actually, but I'm quite happy about that. No more secrets in the command line. In the past, whenever you configured a secret, or not in the past, you still can choose whether you want to use the password store or whether you want to explicitly configure the secret. And if you configured the secret explicitly, it could have been the case that this secret is then passed via the command line explicitly, meaning it, in the worst case, or no, in an equally bad cases, it could show up either in the GUI or in the process list of your server. And with the new API, a side effect is just that no matter how you configure a secret, it will always be passed in a fashion that looks something like this, which is not very nice to read for a user, but then it's not meant to be read by a user, it's meant to be read by a machine, and the machine can deal with it just fine. And the point is you don't have the secret in your process list anymore, ever. And so the API is designed in a way that the actual secret itself isn't even exposed to the plugin. So even if the developer were to do some mistake or accidentally or do some debug logging or whatever, the secret really isn't there to be exposed in the first place. And then Marcel already told that, so for check HTTP, we now can have multiple checks in one rule. The point is that that is now a key part of this API. So any active check rule can now, in principle, create multiple services. We already have it in Checkmk 2.2 for the check ICMP, I think, because that was very important to hack it in there, and we managed to do that. But now it's really part of the official API. Nothing special about it. It's just, of course, that while we migrated most of the active checks to the new API, we didn't change the feature set, and the feature set up to now means you only have one service per rule. But yeah, for the new plugins as check HTTP, we already are making use of this feature. And then we have small quality of life improvements that I would like to show you. So here you can see that the axis on the left before maybe a little bit too cleaned up even, and we managed to make some more sensible values here. This is what Martin already told you about. Another example where we now have proper units, proper in the sense that it's the same unit on the y-axis. And this is one instance of cases where I think the graph should not make you think, right? The point of looking at a graph is you don't want to think, you don't want to read values or numbers, you want to get a visual impression of what is going on. And if you have these kind of axes, I don't think it helps. And there's one more case that I'll show you in a minute. Another example where we just improved the axis to improve the overall readability. And also here, just some naming improvements. You can see the value is now rendered much nicer. And here, these graphs have been combined into, these metrics rather, have been combined into one graph. And they have been in their own graph in the past. And what I would like to point out here is that, of course, these changes are not directly linked to the API in the sense these are a couple of improvements that we could have made without creating the API. The point is that by reducing the number of options and really thinking about what we need to expose to our users very carefully, we have then the capacity to focus on the things that we decided we want to expose and the most important things, and we can then concentrate on those and then improve those. And I think that's another key feature of these APIs that I want to stress, is to have a common understanding of what is the important stuff that we really need to do, and then leave the other stuff out and get the important stuff right. And yeah, I think in this example of the graphing, it becomes very visible to the user, but we also have this in a more theoretical aspect in the other APIs. It's just not so obvious. And then, yeah, I think most of these I already showed you, and we don't have a picture, unfortunately, but I still want to stress in the bottom row, this no more layered areas. So what does it mean? If you have a metric in your graph, you can choose to color the area below your metric. And then you end up with, with an area graph. And in the past, you could choose to either stack two of those areas on top of each other, or you could have them layered in front of each other. And I think, again, this very much defeats the purpose of a graph, because if you don't know whether these areas are now stacked or they are in front of each other, you don't know whether the small one that just lurks about on top is actually a very small one, or is it just as big as the other one and you just can see the overall rim of it, right? So again, the graph should not make you think. So that's why we don't have any more layered graphs. This is just not allowed by the API. And we went through the effort of revisiting all of the graphs that we already had that were making use of these layered areas. And we just redesigned them to be actually properly stacked graphs. And then coming back to something more like theoretical, that's not so visible for the user, but maybe more relevant for the plugin developers. I think we have now a better structure of the plugin files and where they go. So the ship plugins should go in lib Python 3 CMK plugins. So the general rule would be that everything that is under the CMK path is stuff that is supported by us. And the third-party plugins should go to local lib Python 3 CMK underscore add-ons. And I'm not quite sure what the Redfish plugin, whether it is where it should be, or I don't know. We ship it, yeah, but Andreas is maintaining it, so I don't know. It currently is under CMK, I happen to know. Okay, but so that's the general idea, right? Stuff that we support is under CMK. Third-party stuff is under CMK add-ons. But the big advantage and the important thing is that we also changed the way plugins are grouped, because these plugins are now grouped by topic, or we call it family. The point is we are deliberately vague here. So what constitutes a reasonable topic is basically left to the plugin author. The point is that, for example, everything regarding Redfish would be in CMK plugins Redfish, and then under agent-based we have the agent-based plugins. Under rule set we have the rule sets. Under server-side calls we have the server-side calls. You get the idea. There's a couple of more of these folders. But the point is we no longer have all of the check plugins over here and all of the rule sets over there, but we have everything that belongs together and is likely to be packaged into one MKP in one common path. And that makes the plugin deployment and creation much easier. And also it means that every MKP can have its own namespace, and you have it's less likely that you have colliding files or something like that. That's the point where I get an applause. That's cool. Okay, for the timeline. In Checkmk 2.3, yeah. So we implemented these APIs. We migrated a lot of our own code, by far not everything. As you can imagine, with the rule sets, it's similar as for the check plugins. So for the check plugins, we have, I think, about 2,000. The rule sets might only be 1,000, or I'm not sure. But anyway, nothing that we can migrate just like that. The replaced internal APIs will not support it anymore, meaning that if there are any issues with that, we will most likely not address them. Obviously, if something really severe turns out to be wrong, then we will fix it. but we won't put any effort in those anymore. And we will be decommissioning the legacy check API. And by legacy check API, I do not mean the version 1 of the API that we introduced in 2020, but the one before that. And this one will really stop working fast. So if you have still plugins developed against it, so do we. So that might still work, but we are working on migrating those plugins, and everything that we don't need anymore ourselves will be removed as soon as possible. So you should really stop using that. For Checkmk 2.4, we want to have the migration of all active checks and special agents finished for ourselves, so we can remove the legacy API completely. We also hope that we get the metrics and the graphing completely migrated, and the same, so the replaced internal APIs will then be removed, which is, for us, one of the most important things about these APIs, that we can get rid of the stuff where we never know whether we are breaking stuff or whether somebody using it and it's not good documented and so on. So for us developers, the real benefit is to get rid of all of those, because it's expensive to keep that in mind all of the time. Expensive in the sense of takes us a lot of time and effort. And the agent-based API version 1 will be deprecated in 2.4 and then probably removed in 2.5. Fear not, that's the least of your problems. So bottom line is, I really urge you to migrate all of your plugins to the new APIs that we introduced, and do this during Checkmk 2.3. Do not wait. I really think if you try to sit this one out, you will really run into severe problems when upgrading to 2.4. So we have a couple of things that we are helping you with in order to get these migrations done, because I understand that that's not a particularly nice job. You have your plugin and it's just working, and now they change everything and you have to rewrite your plugin. But I'm afraid that's what's happening. We are open source, so we are on GitHub, and you can take a look at the commits. And GitHub, I have created a couple of commits that start with this string pro tip. I've done this in the past for the agent-based API, and I think it was quite useful. So I made again a couple of those where you can take a look at some of the migrations I did, with some long explanations of what's going on, what is the change actually doing and why. Then, as I said, we have now all of the plugin families in one location, and we also have already a lot of code migrated ourselves, of course. So I can encourage you to take a look at the plugins that we ship, because there you can see how we think it's supposed to be done. And in particular, I want to suggest you take a look at the Fritzbox plugin family, because A, chances are you can try it out at home, I think. B, it's quite a small plugin family actually. So it has a special agent that has, I think, one configuration option that is a timeout, something like that. Maybe there's a second option, but really not much more. And there's a couple of check plugins. There are some metrics. So there's a rule set plugin. It contains everything you need, but also everything is quite limited and small. So I think that's a very good example to just take a look at and see how that can work. Then we have migration scripts for simple plugins. You can also use them for complicated plugins, but so these are helper scripts that try to do much of the work that you have to do if you migrate your plugin. What they can't do is perfectly convert all of your plugins to the new APIs. That's very difficult to do this in an automated manner, but I think they really do a lot of the work, and they are a great help. I think I will tell you in the last slide or so why I think that. And particularly it works well for the agent-based API version 1 to version 2, because there we are already starting from the point where we have a well-defined, well-documented API. And so I know very well what are the differences going from version 1 to version 2. So that's actually fairly good scriptable, and there's very little to do manually. That's why I think that's the least of your problems, because I think you really can run the script and the chances are very high that you don't have to do anything. Yeah, read the script into. There are some dependencies to the script, and then just to emphasize again, you really have to check the end result manually. This is not creating perfect code. And if you are a keen observer, you might notice that there are 4 migration helpers here. However, we have 4 new APIs, but for one of the APIs, we can go from the very old API or from the middle-aged API. So there are 5 transitions actually. That means there's 1 script missing. I merged that yesterday, so by now it should be 5 of those there. Yeah, then another resource you can use. So one of the points is that the APIs are properly documented. What does that mean? We have the Sphinx documentation. The Sphinx documentation is not an extensive explanation or guide how to write plugins, but rather it's the hard facts of a reference, meaning what functions are there, what arguments do they take, how do you call it? And there are some simple examples, but yeah, it's not a guide. It's really a reference. Currently you can find it in the site, as you can see on the slide, but we really hope to host it in the web soonish, because I understand that being able to share links or look at it when you are not in front of a running Checkmk site is probably something you want to do. And then we do have a user guide as well that currently describes how to write check plugins with the version 1 API. We hope to get it updated for the version 2 of the API in the next weeks. And we also hope to get it updated to have guides for the other APIs within the next month. And another resource you can use is a live stream. So in 2 weeks, about 2 weeks, we will have a live stream where you can watch me migrate some plugins and ask your questions and just get an idea of how I approach these kind of things. What we will be doing in this stream is mainlining a plugin, because we have heard over and over and over again that the Ceph plugin from Robert is way better than the one we ship. So we are taking this opportunity to mainline his plugin. I will migrate it and then we'll mainline it and then hopefully end up with a better plugin. So thank you very much, Robert, for providing us with this plugin. Do you mind standing up? I think somebody is supposed to be giving you this, and that might be me. Yeah, all right. Thank you very much. All right, so yeah, join me during that live streaming experience. I'm actually looking forward to it. And then another obvious way of getting some information on how to migrate plugin is talk to us. We have this booth over there. I think there are 3 more slots tomorrow, and also obviously tonight, this evening, I'm absolutely in favor of answering some migration questions if you have them. And yeah, so to come back to the initial thing, the major chunk you probably already did if you migrated to the API version 1. And the reason I know that is I migrated in the last, I think 2 weeks is a little bit exaggerated. I think it might have been 4 weeks. But anyway, the point is we have 600 plugins programmed against the API agent-based version 1, and with this helper script, they are now all migrated to the version 2, all 600 of them, so that's really not the big deal. And yeah, the other ones are a little bit more tedious, but you have to get into it. But I think you will see that it really is a nicer way of doing things than it was in the past. Of course, it's now an extra effort to move from the past to these new things. But hopefully then the external extensions and the stable APIs will really work out nicely during update and not cause any hassle anymore. And then, I think this is the last slide that I have. I just wanted to point out that we are talking about extensibility, and now I've been talking about developer APIs for over half an hour. I understand that there are other issues that are also relevant when it comes to this whole ecosystem of extensibility, which is the MKP command line interface, which is this tool that lets you create MKPs. The extension packages site that we have in the site to administer these MKPs, and obviously the exchange that we use for sharing extensions. So we are aware that all of these are there as well, and they can be improved, and we have lots of ideas, and we know you have ideas, and there will be stuff happening in the nearer future, hopefully. And that's it.
Thank you, Moritz.